Yeah, it kind of threw me for a loop too. I told her to her face, I said, Coach, this is for you. In terms of just a sense of confidence, a sense of awareness of that you're not alone. And if anybody know me, it's like I don't play that. So it's like it really hurt my feelings to see her kind of like have emotions in terms of like not feeling valued and not feeling wanted in a place where she has to coach. At the end of the day, this is her job, and so she has to show up too. And I think that people don't really recognize that. And I think that it's our job to remind her. It's our cultures. It's our culture, and I think we have to remind her that our culture is not going to let her fall to the wayside. And so I hope she.
That right there is the part people cannot just brush aside. Kelsey Mitchell did not give some generic answer about blocking out noise. She said seeing Stephanie White feel unwanted actually hurt her feelings, and she told her coach directly, "This is for you." So now the question gets a lot more complicated. Are Fever fans watching a coach lose the room? Or are they watching the exact opposite happen while the relationship between the coach and the crowd falls apart?
What she needs to do, so I'm really proud of her.
Leah, after the last game, Kaylin and Sophie said they really wanted to win for Steph. Kaylin said it made her sick to hear the booze before the game. Yeah. What were your emotions like as a against all that?
Yeah, the same way, honestly. I think when you are on your home floor and your team's getting announced and the coach is getting announced, I feel like there's no reason for any of that. I mean, we come out here and we do everything that we can to win. And I think Steph does a great job with us. Like, we love her and we appreciate her. And so to hear that, it was really annoying, honestly, and disrespectful. But for us, I mean, we kept the main thing, and we...
Aliyah Boston was more measured, but she still made her position clear. She called the reaction toward White annoying and disrespectful, said the players love her, and connected that emotion directly to wanting to win. That matters, because criticism of a coach is one thing. Players publicly circling the wagons around that coach is something completely different. And notice the split already forming. Fans can evaluate substitutions, rotations, late-game decisions, public comments, and everything else a coach does. Players evaluate somebody they work with every day. Those two groups can look at the same person and reach completely different conclusions. But there is another part of this that becomes much more important later. Listen carefully to how these players describe the team culture, because by the time we get to Kelsey Mitchell's full answer, this stops sounding like a few teammates simply trying to be nice to their coach.
So we're going to come out here and we're going to get that dub.
You guys talked about at times how outside noise makes you closer as a group. What role has Steph played in that?
Yeah, I mean, even from the beginning of the season, she just talked about closing the fist. Through everything, no matter what, no matter the background noise, just close the fist, continue to stay together, and that's really our approach every single day we step on that floor, and even when we're in practice too. So, I mean, that's just the example that we have, and so we just love.
Close the fist. That is the language Boston says White has used from the beginning of the season. Ignore the noise, stay together, keep the group connected. That sounds simple until the noise is coming from inside your own building. A coach getting criticized online is normal. A coach hearing visible disapproval during home introductions creates a different dynamic, because now the players are being asked to perform, while the person leading them is being rejected by part of the same audience cheering for them. And this is where the conversation has to be fair in both directions. Boston saying she loves Stephanie White does not automatically prove White has coached every game correctly. It does prove that any claim that White has completely lost her players needs evidence, because Boston is standing in front of reporters saying almost the exact opposite. There is a temptation in sports commentary to turn everything into one clean story. Coach bad, players mad. Coach good, fans wrong, but locker rooms are rarely that simple. Players can genuinely support a coach, while fans genuinely believe that coach is hurting the team. Both things can exist at once. The real question is what happens when those two realities collide for long enough.
Push together. I think the ability to see the next person be great is like floating in our locker room in a lot of positive ways. I think that if there's somebody with a hot hand, you want to make sure they get the ball all the way to the point where if there's a mismatch, you want to make sure we evaluate that mismatch. And I think that we've been having a lot of experience throughout the course of this year to kind of learn those things. And I think that we only get better. And I think that our chemistry and our ability to want to gel is real. I don't think that's a fake, and I think that that's why we have some success.
Now this is where it gets interesting from a basketball standpoint. Mitchell is describing a locker room that, in her words, actually wants the next person to succeed. She talks about finding the hot hand, recognizing mismatches, building chemistry, and says that desire to gel is real. That is not the language you usually hear from a player trying to quietly tell the world that everything behind the scenes is broken. And if you're going to criticize White, this is where the criticism has to become specific. Was a timeout missed? Say that. Was the wrong lineup on the floor? Break down the lineup. Did a defensive coverage fail repeatedly? Show the possessions. But saying the coach has lost everybody becomes harder to square with players publicly describing trust and chemistry. There is also a strategic reason the Fever would care about this perception. Any team trying to win at a high level needs credibility inside the locker room. Once every press conference becomes a referendum on whether the coach should still have the job, every basketball question gets dragged into a political question about authority. And that can become corrosive even if the original criticism was completely legitimate. The irony is that White's own message about keeping the main thing is now being tested by a controversy surrounding White herself.
Does it feel like to you that you've reached another level of scoring?
Yeah, I think the craziest part for me is I feel like there's another gear that I could tap into. And that's just where my standard is. There's so much more film to watch and so much more work to kind of put in, but I take pride in how I get my work done, and how I get to my spots on the floor. And so a lot of the success I've had this year was just really taking that focus serious about making sure I find my spots on the floor and be confident.
Kelsey also gives you another clue about why players may see this situation very differently than outsiders do. She talks about how much work she still believes she has left to do. More film, more preparation, more confidence getting to her spots. That mindset matters because players tend to live inside the process. Fans live inside the result. A fan sees the final score and asks who failed. A player wakes up the next morning, watches film, goes through treatment, practices the same actions again, and sees the 100 smaller decisions that produce that score. Neither perspective is automatically superior, but they are different. So when Mitchell defends White, she may not be saying every decision this coach makes is correct. She may be saying, you do not see what this person is doing with us every day. That distinction gets lost when everything turns into a referendum on whether somebody should be fired. And there is a much bigger reason this matters. Mitchell is having the kind of season where her individual credibility inside that locker room is enormous. When one of your most important veteran players publicly says the coach is not alone, that carries more weight than an anonymous rumor or speculation about what players supposedly think.
In a drastic improvement.
AB, I'm not sure how much more you can say, but when you see Kelsey, who's already one of the best scorers in the world, get to this level, what does that say about her work ethic and the way she's playing?
Yeah, Kelsey comes in here and she works every day. I mean, she gets up extra shots. She just comes in, does what she needs to do, and I think, honestly, she's really just the MVP. Like, I think that's just what she's been doing. Every single night you see her come out and she drops, I don't even know how many points at this rate. She defends her butt off, and then we just come out here and we play. I mean, she does exactly.
Boston goes even further on Mitchell herself, calling her really just MVP and praising what she does every night on both ends. That seems separate from the coaching controversy, but it actually helps explain the tension. Winning changes the temperature around everything. If the Fever were collapsing every night, player support for White would be interpreted as loyalty during a disaster. But when players believe they are improving, when Mitchell is producing at an elite level, when Boston is talking about growth, the internal case for stability becomes stronger. That does not mean the public case disappears. Sports history is full of coaches who had supporters in the locker room and still got fired. It is also full of coaches who were unpopular with fans, survived the pressure, and later looked much better once the team stabilized. The problem is that none of those outcomes can be assumed in advance. The original commentator in this footage speculates that Indiana may be trying to repair White's public image because the organization could potentially move on from her. That is speculation presented by the commentator, not verified information in this transcript. There is no official team statement here saying White is being prepared for an exit, and that distinction matters. Once speculation gets repeated enough, people start reacting to it like a report. Then every player defending the coach gets interpreted as evidence of a secret organizational campaign, instead of the simpler possibility that the players genuinely support her. Could a team prefer its players to calm a controversy? Of course. But unless somebody produces evidence that these answers were scripted or coordinated, you cannot responsibly state that as fact.
Knows that.
You had Gary as an assistant in 2022.
Yeah.
What's it like having him back right now?
I love Klopp. Klopp is like our secret sauce, man. Klopp is like, I mean, seriously, the success that Seattle had in those times was because of people like Klopp, and I think that even though he's silent and just walk around while people really know who he is, he has the brains out this world. Defensively, he just wants us to be great. I think that everything that he's experienced with Seattle and winning championships, I think that he's actually pointing to us and just in so many, like, I don't know, weird, but like original ways.
Now listen to how Mitchell talks about the staff beyond White. She praises assistant coach Gary Kloppenberg, calls him their secret sauce, talks about his championship experience in Seattle, his defensive mind, and the way players listen when he speaks. That gives us a wider picture of what Mitchell appears to value: experience, preparation, defensive accountability, and coaches who can translate knowledge into something players actually use. This also complicates the idea that everything good happening with Indiana belongs to one person and everything bad belongs to another. Teams do not work that way. A head coach sets the direction, but assistants build coverages, scouts identify tendencies, development coaches work with individuals, medical staffs manage recovery, veterans police standards, and stars determine whether the entire system works under pressure. When fans focus all frustration onto White, the head coach becomes the symbol for every problem. That is part of the job. Coaches get paid to absorb blame, but players see the ecosystem. Mitchell, specifically highlighting Kloppenberg, suggests she is not blindly crediting White for everything. She is identifying different people and what they contribute. That makes her defense of White more meaningful because she is clearly capable of separating roles. And it raises an uncomfortable question for people who have already decided the locker room must secretly despise this staff. What evidence would change your mind? If Boston says she loves the coach, that gets dismissed. If Mitchell says the coach is not alone, that gets dismissed. If Mitchell praises another coach specifically for basketball reasons, that gets dismissed too. At some point, the standard cannot be that only evidence supporting one conclusion counts.
The wants, the things that you want offensively comes from getting defensive stops. And so I just started to take it into account, like, wow, if I could get one more deflection, if I get one more steal, you know, you get a chance to go be you on the offensive side of things. But really and honestly, I'm a competitor. And so when Steph and BJ feels like I can do certain things and I could take certain defensive challenges, I think that they know that I'm not going to turn them down. I also think that my ability to want to play offense also is my ability to want to play defense, and I don't think people...
And now we get into something that is actually showing up on the floor: defensive buy-in. Mitchell says White and the staff trust her with certain defensive challenges, and she does not turn those assignments down. She connects her defense directly to getting chances on offense. That is a player talking about coaching in functional terms, not friendship, not public relations, responsibility. This is important because one of the fastest ways to see whether players have mentally checked out on a coach is effort in the ugly parts of basketball. Sprinting back, fighting through screens, chasing loose balls, accepting difficult assignments, rotating when the first action breaks down. Those things do not prove everybody loves the coach, but they reveal whether the team is still responding to demands. And according to Mitchell, the staff is asking something from her defensively that she has actively embraced. That gives us a better framework for judging White than simply asking whether fans like her. Are the players executing? Are individuals developing? Are stars accepting roles? Are mistakes being corrected? Is the team getting better at the things the staff emphasizes? Those are coaching questions. The crowd reaction may tell you about public confidence. It does not by itself answer the basketball questions. And this is exactly why the controversy has become so emotionally charged. One side is judging White primarily through public moments that frustrated them, while the players are describing thousands of private moments the audience never sees.
Kelsey, you have moments in games where you might not have the best play, and the next play will do something crazy good. Mm-hmm. How do you just continue to have this mentality of, like, maybe that play ain't going to stick with me? And did you always have that as a youngin'?
No. I think that was being a pro. I think that's something I had to learn. If this was like 3 or 4 years ago, I probably would have, collectively had like 4 or 5 bad plays in a row. I just think that over time we just try to figure out ways to like move on, and that's where my mindset of my career is. Right.
That answer from Mitchell is one of the strongest pieces of context in this entire interview. She talks about being a professional, learning to stop 1 bad play from becoming 4 or 5 bad plays, and developing the ability to move on. Apply that mentality to this entire Fever situation. A franchise under intense attention cannot allow every bad night to become a week-long identity crisis. One questionable decision becomes a debate about the coach's entire future. One emotional press conference becomes proof of instability. One disagreement becomes a theory about the locker room. That kind of atmosphere can swallow a season. The players appear to be trying to do the opposite. Next play, next game, next possession. And whether you like White or not, that mindset is probably necessary because this team is operating under a microscope where ordinary basketball turbulence becomes national conversation. That also places more responsibility on White. If your players are publicly defending you this strongly, then you have to reward that trust with clarity, composure, and results. Player loyalty cannot become a shield against criticism. It creates a higher standard. When Mitchell says the culture will not let White fall to the wayside, that support comes with an implied expectation. The coach has to keep giving the group reasons to believe the defense was worth making.
For Dallas.
Kelsey, you and Caitlin have an historic season as a backcourt duo. The other day on the broadcast, you said your love for one another kind of leads to your chemistry. I guess, is there a point where she went from teammate to friend, a turning point that kind of...
I think it was always like that. I just think that as you kind of like have experiences with each other, you sit on a plane together and you walk on a bus together and you walk in a hotel together, and those interactions are, that they're stepping stones and you build.
Now the story shifts from coach-player loyalty to something that may matter even more for Indiana's future, the relationship between Kelsey Mitchell and Caitlin Clark. Mitchell describes how ordinary shared experiences build that bond, sitting on planes, riding buses, walking through hotels. Repeated interactions becoming stepping stones. That is how real chemistry usually forms, not one dramatic speech, repetition. And it matters, because when a team has multiple high-level offensive players, the relationship between them can determine whether the roster becomes something sustainable or something temporary. The public tends to obsess over hierarchy. Whose team is it? Who gets the last shot? Who gets the headlines? Mitchell is describing almost the opposite mentality, connection through shared experience. That should matter to anyone evaluating White, because part of a coach's job is creating an environment where star personalities can coexist without turning every possession into a referendum on status. If Mitchell and Clark are growing closer while both producing, that is a positive sign for the organization, regardless of where anybody stands on White personally. And it also reveals why these players may react so strongly when the environment around them becomes hostile towards somebody they see as part of that same daily process. They are not experiencing the Fever as a television show. They are living inside it.
And you constantly connect, and I think that connection for me and Cece is genuine. I think that the more and more you get to know who a person is and you know what they bring to the table, and you don't judge.
That was a great question.
The one thing about Cece and her career is that people have already been judging her, and she's just really getting started. And so my job is to not be that person. If I can pour in different ways, and like I said, I always fill in the gaps for her because of what she does and how she does it, and the eyes and ears of all the people. It's the only thing that I could do is kind of fill in the gaps and kind of just be a good president.
And that is the perfect place to end, because Mitchell's earlier answer almost sounds like the philosophy she is applying to this entire situation. Show up, play, do the right thing, let it flow, and keep the main thing the main thing. The Fever now have two competing realities in front of them. One is the outside pressure, fans criticizing decisions, questioning leadership, and making their dissatisfaction visible. The other is what Boston and Mitchell just put on the record: respect, loyalty, connection, a belief that the coach is part of the culture they are trying to protect. Eventually, those two realities have to meet. Either the basketball gives the players enough evidence to justify their confidence, or the basketball gives the critics enough evidence to demand change. So pick a side based on what you heard. Do Boston and Mitchell's comments convince you that Stephanie White still deserves the chance to lead this team, or do you think player loyalty is covering for coaching problems that Indiana eventually has to address? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want more Fever breakdowns built around what the players actually say and what happens on the floor, like the video and subscribe.
I just was aware of the streaks and the numbers a little bit on TV the other day. So this is kind of new for me. But try to keep the main thing, man, for real. Sophie just asked me, she was like, I was like, I don't know. I just, you just show up, you play, you try to do the right thing, and you just let it flow. And that's a genuine response, man, because I can't tell you any other way,
That might be the most revealing thing Mitchell says about any teammate. People have already judged Caitlin Clark's career, Mitchell says, even though she is just getting started. And Mitchell says her own role is to fill the gaps, support her, and be a presence. Think about the leadership implied in that answer. This is a veteran player acknowledging the pressure around a younger superstar and choosing not to add to it. That tells you something about the internal culture the Fever players are trying to protect. And now we can finally come back to the central question from the beginning. Is this public defense of Stephanie White proof that every criticism of her is wrong? No. But is it meaningful evidence against the idea that she has completely lost the locker room? Absolutely. You have Boston saying the players love and appreciate her. You have Mitchell saying the coach is not alone. You have Mitchell describing a real team culture, praising specific staff members, accepting difficult defensive responsibilities, talking about chemistry that she says is genuine, and explaining how relationships with teammates are getting stronger through shared experience. Those are not meaningless statements. The more interesting argument is not whether White has supporters. She clearly does, based on what these players are publicly saying. The argument is whether that support should be enough to outweigh the concerns fans have about her decisions and public handling of controversial moments. That is where this gets difficult. A professional coach does not need unanimous approval from the audience. If that were the standard, almost nobody would survive a losing streak. But a professional coach does need enough trust from ownership, enough responsiveness from the roster, and enough performance on the floor to justify continuing. Fans are allowed to say the threshold has not been met. Players are allowed to say they believe it has, and the organization eventually has to choose which evidence matters most. There is also a danger in turning this into a demographic battle over which players are defending whom. Boston and Mitchell should be evaluated on what they actually said, not reduced to racial categories. The substance of their comments is strong enough on its own. They are professional athletes speaking about their coach, their workplace, and the culture they experience every day. That is the story, not who is permitted to defend White. Not which player supposedly represents which faction. The real story is that the public relationship with the coach appears fractured while the locker room, at least through these statements, is publicly closing ranks around her, and that creates a pressure cooker. If Indiana keeps winning and continues improving, these comments could eventually look like the moment the players drew a line around their coach and survived the backlash together. If the team stalls, the same comments could later look like a locker room defending a coach right before the organization decided results were not good enough. Nobody in this transcript knows which outcome is coming. That is why speculation about White already being on her way out needs to stay labeled as speculation until something official happens. But the player comments themselves are real, and they deserve to be treated as evidence, not evidence that White is perfect. Evidence that the relationship between White and at least these prominent players is very different from the relationship between White and some of the fan base. And there is one more piece of this that people may be underestimating. When players defend a coach this publicly, firing that coach is no longer just a basketball transaction. It becomes a locker room management decision. The front office would have to consider how key players interpret it, whether they believe their voices mattered, whether the replacement fits the culture they are describing, and whether changing the coach improves the team enough to justify disrupting relationships that players clearly value. That does not make White untouchable. No coach should be untouchable. It just means the decision would be more complicated than fans booed, therefore fire her. The Fever would have to answer a much harder question. Are the problems with White bigger than the trust she appears to have built with important players? And that answer cannot come from social media alone. It has to come from the basketball.